Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to be ranking every single domain from worst to best. And before I start the video, if you guys could like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. But anyways, moving on to the video. And this is a PVE tier list, and I don't really think any domain in the game is actually bad. So if your favorite domain is like kind of low, it's not bad. It's just not as good as the others in my opinion. Okay, so the worst domain in my opinion is definitely Dogon's Horizon of the Captivating Skanda. Basically, what this domain does is it just applies a wet effect which decreases their speed and damage they do. And there's also a sure hit effect where if you use Death Swarm, it hits everything in the domain, which I think is pretty cool. But besides all of that, the debuff is kind of bad. It doesn't really do anything in my opinion, especially on bosses. And while the domain effect is cool, it just doesn't do a lot of damage by itself. So because the debuff isn't that good against bosses, and the fact that the sure hit effect doesn't do a lot of damage, I'm gonna have to put it in C tier. I think it just gets outperformed by every other domain in the game. Everything else does more damage, there's more uses for it, so I'm gonna have to put it in C tier. Now, next up on the list is gonna be Coff of the Iron Mountain, which is Jogo's domain. I just think it's a worse Sukuna's domain, to be honest. Like, the burn effect is just the same. So they're just constantly burning. It does decent damage. It's a slower ticker than Sukuna's zone. I just would rather have Sukuna's domain, to be honest. It also increases the range of Molten Chamber by a pretty big margin. So this is what Molten Chamber looks like outside of the domain. So I guess it's useful for crowd control, but outside of that, I just don't see this domain being as useful as the other ones. And that's why it's going to have to go in C tier. I will put it above Dogon's just because it's a little bit more useful because it actually does damage. But other than that, it just gets outclassed by every other domain, just like Dogon's. And I mean, the whole gimmick of Dogon's domain is the burn, but Sukuna's just does it better. It does like triple the damage, it's faster, and I just don't see a reason to waste something as rare as a domain shard on Dogon's when you could just hopefully get enough spins for Sukuna Vessel. So again, it's not bad, it's just outshined by the other domains. Now next on the list is going to be Higurama's Deadly Sentencing, and I'm a really big fan of this domain. The only problem is that it's all RNG based. But to be fair, you can't really lose in it. And what I mean is, in the domain, you're presented a rock, paper, scissors game with whoever you domain. And if you win, you get the Executioner Sword, which does a lot of damage. But if you tie, the enemy can't use their technique. And if you lose, you just get to keep the attack and defense buffs that domains usually give you. Now, how the domain works is you're going to be presented with rock, paper, scissors. And if you win, you'll get the Executioner Sword, which does a ton of damage, as you can see. It literally does like 2k a hit. And I hear that there's actually a pattern that bosses use when you're rock, paper, scissoring. And apparently you can win every single time and get the Executioner Sword every time. I don't know if this is true, but just because that there's a chance that you could get the Executioner Sword, I'm going to put it in the B tier because it just does so much damage and it's really good. Especially since even if you tie, it takes away their entire technique, which I think is really good. I would put it in A, but it's still an RNG based domain, so I'm not going to put it higher than this. And now moving on to Mahito's Self-Embodiment of Perfection. I honestly think that this domain is really underrated just because of how much damage it can actually do. And I don't think people really know how to use it, to be honest. And basically, the more bubbles they have, the more damage your Soul Touch will do. And you're able to apply these bubbles by just hitting them, and you can actually see how much they have on them. And the Soul Touch does have an unlimited range in the domain on everybody with the transfiguration stacks. I think it's a really cool idea, and I think it's really decent. Just in PvE, I just don't really see this being as useful as the other domains, and that is why, in my opinion, it's definitely going to go in the B tier. And because it's pretty straightforward and easy to use, I'm going to put it above Deadly Sentencing. It also doesn't revolve around RNG for the entire win con, but again, you rely on Soul Touch you have to have it as a move for the sure hit to even like be in effect. But again, it has good damage potential. I just don't see this being as good in PvE as, like, again, these top 5 domains. So yeah, I thought about it and I realized that Deadly Sentencing just has way more damage potential than Mahito's. And the fact that if you do get the Executioner Sword, you only need an M1 pretty much to do all that damage. Well, this one you have to M1 and use the move that's on a cooldown. So for that reason, I'm gonna move Deadly Sentencing above Mahito. So next up on the list is gonna be Idle Death Gamble. So Idle Death Gamble is actually different from the other domains, where instead of a domain bar, you have a fever meter, and you're actually able to pop it before you even have like this filled up all the way. How it works is you use your domain and you hit enemies inside and it fills up the fever meter. And once the fever meter is filled up, it'll play this animation and it breaks the domain. It plays like this little music animation, I guess, I don't know. But afterwards, you'll get a cooldown buff, you'll get a health buff, and you'll get a damage buff. and it's actually pretty useful in PvE, and I don't really see the use of it, to be honest. I feel like it just slows down your clear times on bosses, and it doesn't really help at all. Unless you're like dying to the boss a lot, then I guess it'd be helpful to regen. But again, I know in PvP it's a really different story, and I know Idle Death Gamble's really good in PvP. But in PvE, I just don't see where it's needed, to be honest. So that's why I'm gonna put it at A tier. It's gonna be a low A tier, to be honest. It's a PvE list, and like I said, in PvP it's a different story. But I just don't really see the use of it, to be honest, because it's kind of easy to survive bosses, to be honest, and the only thing that you really need in domains is damage, and Hikaru just does not give a lot of damage. So again, it's still one of the better domains. It's just not better than these four, which are definitely the domains that you should go after. Okay, and next up on the list, I know this is going to be really controversial, but it's going to be Sukuna's domain. And before you get mad, just let me explain. So first off, it does good damage, and it does it for a while, but it only adds up to around, I would say, 10k damage. And you could do that with like the Black Flash build, which can do 15k damage in like 3 seconds. Again, this is a PvE list. I guess it's really good in curses actually, but I'm mainly revolving this list around bosses, and I just don't see this domain being super good against them. And mainly bosses are the end game, and that's where you're usually gonna have domains, is the end of the game, because domain stars are so rare. You're gonna be one to farm these bosses really quick, and to get the max amount of damage that Malevolent Shrine gives, it's gonna take around like a minute for all the damage to actually like complete. So again, I think this is a great domain, especially for farming like curses or like investigations. But on bosses, which is what you're mostly going to be farming for all your weapons and stuff, it's just not too good at single target damage. And that's why I'm going to put it in the high A tier. It's better than every domain that I've listed so far, but it just doesn't compete with these three, to be honest. It's not great at farming bosses, in my opinion. It's really good at like curses, and it's really good at missions and investigations. But other than that, I just don't see a use for it in boss farming. And boss farming is mainly what you're going to be doing in endgame. But again, in PvP, this is probably an S. This is definitely S tier, actually, right next to Kari's. So, and now moving on to the next one, it's going to be Gojo's Unlimited Void. You could argue that Sukuna's is better, but just because that it makes the boss stay still for a while, I'm going to put it above it, because you're able to burst on the boss really quick if you have the right builds. And everyone knows that like once you get to boss rank, once you get good at it, the most annoying part is when the boss keeps moving around. So this is good for locking him down. So again, it's not much to say about this domain. It's just really good at locking bosses down, curses down, whatever you need to like just beat on, you could do it. The only issue I have with it though is that it also like locks your teammates down. Like your teammates will get stunned by your Unlimited Void, which is really dumb in my opinion, but you know, it's just how it works. So this is definitely going to go above Sukuna's domain, in my opinion. If your build is super good, the crowd control that it gives and the fact that it freezes bosses, if you're able to burst the boss down before they're able to start moving, it's just really good. But if you're not, and your build is like not there yet, I would definitely take Shrine over it. But my build's pretty good right now, and I'm able to burst bosses down really quick, and the fact that the boss has to freeze when I use it, it's just really useful, so I'm gonna have to put it at high A tier. So next up on the list, and I'm sure it's not a surprise, but it's gonna be Yuta's Unequivocal Love. It's just a really spammy domain for a lot of damage. It has a lot of burst. So basically what this domain does is that you have a new item in your hotbar, and you're able to grab a katana, and it'll give you random moves. So you can see that I have a ratio technique, and I can actually use Black Flash with it. And I'm actually, if I don't want these moves, I'm able to grab another katana. So in my opinion, this domain is really good. Like you can see, I just got a hollow purple out of it. But again, it's just really spammy. It's able to dish out a lot of damage. And it actually has a secret moveset with Jacob's Ladder, so if I'm not looking over anywhere, the Jacob's Ladder will hit everybody in the domain, and it does way more damage as well. So for all of that and the damage potential that you could do with it, it is an RNG-based domain, but in my opinion, it's better than Higuruma's because you don't really lose at all. There's no chance of drawing or anything. You just pull out a katana if you don't like the moves. You're able to switch it back. And for all of that, it's going to have to go in the S tier. And like I said, the sure hit effect is Jacob's Ladder, which is already the best maximum technique in the game. And if you pair it with like the fact that it does way more damage than the domain, and it's like the sure hit, it just makes it like 10 times stronger. And now for the best domain in the game, in my opinion, it's going to be Yukis Celestial Opera. So in the domain, your abilities are actually like full mass. So all your abilities have the most amount of damage they could possibly do. And they have a 10% defense reduction, so you're able to do more damage to them. And on top of Star Rage's attacks already just being like... And Star Rage's moves already do so much damage, so the fact that it automatically fills up your mass bar is just insane because you're able to keep spamming it. They have a defense reduction. You're able to clear out bosses or mobs just really, really quick. And it takes a long time to fill up your mass bar, so the fact that when you're in a domain, every single star rage move has full mass, it has the full damage capability. Like a full Terra does around 3,000 to 4,000 damage. So just being able to spam that in your domain while they have a defense reduction is just insane. And for all of those reasons, it has to go in high S tier. It just has so much damage potential if you like have at least 3 star rage moves. And if the boss is low and you're like full HP inside the domain, you're actually able to chant total collapse. So it just does like 7k damage, and on top of all that, before if you're spamming star rage's full mass attacks, it could stack up to like over 20,000 damage, which is insane. It's more than any other domain. So this is my list. The only really like domains that I'm kind of teetering on switching is Deadly Sensing and Unlimited Void and Malevolent Shrine. But other than that, I'm pretty satisfied. So I'm wondering, like, what would you guys change in this list? This is a PvE tier list. I know this would be completely, like, different in PvP, but this is my take on it. And again, if you guys enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It really does help me a lot. But yeah, I hope you guys learned something new, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching.